Most people walk through life with a general sense that they want something better, but no clear picture of what that better looks like. They say they want success, happiness, wealth, health, and love, but those words are blurry. They're like looking through a foggy window, hoping to recognize a familiar face. But the moment you take the time to define your goal, to clearly state what you want, when you want it, and why, it's as if the fog clears and the image comes into sharp focus. That's the power of clarity. That's the beginning of real change. Until a goal is clear, it's powerless. But once you define it with precision, it begins to shape your thoughts, your behaviors, and eventually your reality. When you sit down with a pen and write the words, I want to earn this much by this date, or I want to weigh this much by this month, you are no longer operating on hope or vague intentions. You're moving with clarity, and clarity is what separates the drifter from the achiever. The drifter lets life happen to him. The achiever decides what he wants and goes after it. Without clarity, days turn into weeks, weeks turn into years, and you're still wondering why things haven't changed. But with clarity, even one day can shift your direction entirely. Clarity isn't just about knowing what you want. It's about making sure your actions and your mindset are in alignment with it. People often say, I just need motivation. But the truth is, you don't need more motivation. What you need is a clearer goal. Motivation flows naturally when your goal is specific enough to inspire action. Vague goals lead to vague energy. Clear goals light a fire. A person who says, I want to lose weight, may or may not ever start. But someone who says, I want to lose 10 pounds by October 1st so I can feel confident at my friend's wedding, has suddenly created energy, direction, and urgency. The difference is clarity. The difference is knowing exactly what the finish line looks like. Clarity also gives you the power to say no. When you're unclear, everything looks like an opportunity. But when you're clear, you can easily distinguish between a distraction and a step forward. You don't get pulled into every new thing because you already know what you're aiming for. That saves time, that protects your focus, and that multiplies your effort. People who don't have clear goals often wonder why they're so busy but feel so unfulfilled. It's because they're running in circles instead of moving in a straight line. And a straight line only becomes visible when you know exactly where you're headed. Think of it like a magnifying glass. When you hold it up to the sun without direction, nothing happens. But when you tilt it just right and focus the beam onto a single point, it starts a fire. That's what clarity does. It focuses all of your scattered thoughts, energy, and actions onto one defined spot. And that focused energy becomes unstoppable. It's not magic, it's clarity. It's the difference between wanting success and moving toward it. Clarity also makes obstacles smaller. When your goal is blurry, every challenge seems massive because you don't know what's on the other side. But when your goal is crystal clear, challenges become just another part of the path. You know where you're going, and that makes detours feel temporary instead of permanent. Clarity gives you confidence. You may not know every step, but you know the direction, and that's enough to keep walking in the beginning. Your dream may seem too big or too far away, but clarity helps you break it down. Once you know what you want, you can ask, what do I need to do this month to get closer? What should I do this week? What should I do today? Suddenly the mountain becomes a series of small hills. The impossible becomes doable. But none of that starts until the picture in your mind becomes detailed enough to act upon. You'll also find that clarity attracts help. When you can clearly state your goal, others understand how to support you. They see your seriousness. They recognize your commitment. They offer advice, resources, or connections because you've shown them a clear destination. It's hard to help someone who doesn't know where they're going. But it's easy to support someone who says, this is what I'm building, this is why it matters, and this is what I need. The clearer your vision, the more doors begin to open. Clarity is the starting point of all progress. It is the foundation of all achievement. Before the actions, before the habits, before the momentum, there is clarity. It's where the shift happens. It's where the fog lifts. It's where energy is born and purpose is discovered. Most people are waiting for life to show them a sign before they get clear. But it works the other way around. You get clear first, and then life begins to respond. You stop hoping, and you start building. You stop wandering, and you start moving. You stop guessing, and you start deciding. And with that decision comes power, the kind of power that can take an invisible dream and bring it into visible reality. The human mind is a goal-seeking machine. It's designed to focus, to lock in, and to aim. Without a target, it wanders. It drifts from one thought to another, one distraction to the next, one day into the next. But the moment you give it something specific to chase, it comes alive. It sharpens. It begins to filter everything through the lens of that one pursuit. When your mind has a clear target, it recruits your energy, your time, your habits, and your attention to move you in that direction. That's how you move from motion to progress. That's how you go from activity to achievement. It's not just about staying busy. It's about aiming your efforts at something meaningful every day. People spend their hours doing 100 different things, but only a few of those things bring them closer to anything worthwhile. Why? Because they don't have a target. They're shooting arrows into the air, hoping one will land somewhere valuable. But without a bullseye, effort is wasted. And here's the truth. When the mind doesn't know what to aim at, it starts reacting instead of creating. It starts surviving instead of building. It starts doubting instead of believing. That's what happens when there's no target. But the moment you give your mind something to pursue, something to measure progress by, something to aim for, it flips a switch. It goes from random to purposeful, from reactive to strategic. The mind loves direction. It thrives on knowing where it's going. That's why goal setting is not just about writing something on paper. It's about training your mind to wake up every morning with a purpose. When you have a target, you stop asking what to do next. You already know. You stop wasting energy on distractions that don't serve you. You stop entertaining every invitation that pulls you off course, because your mind is locked in. It's aligned, and alignment is what builds momentum. A goal doesn't just give your body something to do. It gives your mind something to believe in, something to fight for, something to protect. Even in the smallest tasks, a target brings structure. Think about a student preparing for an exam. Without a goal, they study randomly, hoping something sticks. But with a target score in mind, their approach changes. They study strategically. They track their progress. They adjust their methods. They review their mistakes. Why? Because the target tells the mind what matters most. And once the mind knows what matters, it gets creative, resourceful, and disciplined. The same thing happens in life. The moment you set a goal, your mind starts noticing opportunities, gathering information, spotting patterns, and connecting dots that were always there but previously invisible. That's how powerful a clear target is. Your subconscious also responds to targets. When you go to sleep with a goal in mind, your subconscious mind keeps working. It processes ideas, solutions, and possibilities. That's why so many people wake up with sudden clarity, unexpected insight, or renewed energy. Their mind was still aiming even while they rested. Without a target, that same power stays idle. But with a target, your entire inner system becomes a support team working behind the scenes. It's not luck. It's alignment. It's design. It's how your mind was built to function. When you set a target, you also set a filter. You start saying yes to the right things and no to the wrong ones. You develop the ability to evaluate choices not just by how they feel in the moment, but by how they serve the mission. You start measuring actions against progress, not just preference. That kind of mental discipline doesn't come from willpower alone. It comes from having a target so strong that it rewires your responses. You start acting based on where you want to go, not just where you are. The greatest athletes, artists, entrepreneurs, and leaders all operate with targets, not because they never get tired or distracted, but because they've trained their minds to focus. They understand that aimlessness is the enemy of greatness. They can know that without a target, talent is wasted, time is lost, and energy is misused. But with a target, everything becomes a tool, even setbacks, even failures, even delays. The mind interprets everything differently when it knows what it's working toward. Failure becomes feedback. Delay becomes preparation. Doubt becomes a reminder to double down. People underestimate how much potential they have simply because they haven't activated their mind through a clear goal. They wait to feel confident before they decide what they want. But that's backward. Confidence comes after the decision. Once the mind knows what the target is, confidence grows from action. You take a step, you learn, you adjust, and you move again. That loop builds momentum, and momentum builds belief. But none of that starts until the target is defined. The mind is powerful, but only when it's focused. And focus is a product of aim. You can't harness the full strength of your thoughts, your will, or your discipline until they are all pointed in one direction. That's why vague dreams produce vague results, but clear targets produce visible progress. When the mind knows what to do, it begins doing it even when it's hard, even when it's slow, even when it's uncertain. That inner commitment drives you forward. Not because everything is easy, but because your mind refuses to let go of what you've told it is important. It becomes your compass, your engine, your advisor, and your ally. All because it finally has a target worth pursuing. Everyone has wishes. People wish for success, wish for wealth, wish for better health, wish for freedom, and wish for happiness. But wishes without structure fade with time. They drift away with every distraction, every setback, every delay. A wish is soft, fragile, and fleeting. It feels good in the moment, but it has no weight, no anchor, no direction. That's why most wishes never come true. They stay in the realm of maybe. But when a person takes that wish and writes it down, attaches a deadline to it, breaks it into steps, and commits to action, it ceases to be a wish. It becomes a goal. And goals are powerful because they turn the invisible into the visible. They convert emotion into motion, desire into discipline, and ideas into achievement. A goal is simply a wish with a plan. The moment you make it specific, it starts to guide you. You're no longer floating in a sea of possibilities. You're sailing towards something defined. You've picked a point on the horizon, and now your decisions, your habits, and your priorities begin to align. A person who says, I want to be rich someday, might feel good saying it, but nothing changes. But someone who says, I will earn $10 in a month through my business by next July, has already begun to transform that wish into a strategy. That level of clarity brings questions like, what do I need to learn? Who do I need to meet? What should I stop doing? What's my next move? These are not wishful questions. These are strategic questions. And strategic questions lead to intentional answers. When you operate with goals, you don't wait for life to give you permission. You give yourself permission. You stop hoping that the wind will blow in your favor, and you start adjusting the sails. You become proactive. You begin each day with a sense of direction. That direction fuels discipline. You know why you're waking up early. You know why you're saying no to distractions. You know why you're working harder than others who seem more comfortable. Because your mind isn't waiting for someday. It's working on a plan today. And every action you take brings you a little closer to the target. Wishing is passive, but goal setting is active. It pulls you into the process. It makes you responsible. You can't hide behind excuses when you have a goal, because the goal keeps asking, what did you do today? And if the answer is nothing, that discomfort becomes a teacher. It forces you to face the gap between where you are and where you want to be. That gap is not your enemy, it's your map. Your goal shows you the distance, but it also shows you the path. And once you see the path, your mind starts building bridges. It starts seeing opportunities where before there were only obstacles. Goals create urgency. They give you a reason to act now. They don't let you postpone your potential. With a goal, every hour matters. Every decision matters. You begin to value your time differently. You begin to choose growth over comfort. And as you take steps forward, your confidence grows. You start to believe not just in the goal, but in yourself. That belief is reinforced by action, and action is driven by the plan. And the plan exists because the goal was set. That's how the cycle works. That's how momentum is built. People often confuse motion with progress. They stay busy, they stay active, they move constantly, but they're not moving toward anything specific. They're just running in circles. But a goal changes that. A goal brings structure. It takes your energy and gives it direction. It brings purpose to your routine. Now You're not just doing things. You're doing the right things. You're not just hoping something works. You're testing, measuring, and improving. Your work has intent. Your growth has a framework, and your results have a timeline. The transformation begins with a simple decision to move from wishing to planning. That one shift changes how you see the world. You stop blaming and you start building. You stop waiting and you start creating. You stop dreaming only at night and you start dreaming while you're awake with your eyes open and your hands in motion. Goals take your invisible ideas and give them shape. They give them texture, form, and life. And once you see even a small result from that commitment, you begin to understand the difference between wishing and achieving. You don't need to know the entire plan on day one. You just need to define the target. The plan will evolve. The strategy will grow. The path will shift, but none of that begins without a goal. The decision to move towards something specific opens up a new level of energy, creativity, and resilience. You begin to speak differently, act differently, walk differently. Why? Because you're no longer wandering, you're moving with purpose. And that purpose turns ordinary days into stepping stones. It turns uncertainty into curiosity. It turns effort into investment. And every investment, no matter how small, compounds over time into a future that once existed only in your imagination. No one builds a skyscraper by accident. No one constructs a bridge by guesswork. And no one creates a masterpiece by just hoping the pieces fall into place. Behind every great structure is a detailed blueprint. Behind every strong foundation is a deliberate plan. In life, it's the same. You can't build a successful future without a blueprint, and your goals are that blueprint. They turn your vision into something measurable, your desire into something structured, your potential into something purposeful. Without a goal, there's nothing to guide your efforts, no framework to organize your time, no system to hold you accountable. But when a goal is in place, progress becomes a process. It becomes something you can measure, track, improve, and celebrate. People often say they want to succeed, but when you ask them what their plan is, they don't have one. They just want to feel motivated, to feel excited, to feel ready. But motivation without direction is like revving the engine of a car that's not in gear. You make noise, you burn energy, but you don't go anywhere. Progress isn't accidental, it's architectural. You design it step by step. You engineer your days based on where you want to be months or years from now. And that design starts the moment you set a goal, the moment you write it down, the moment you give it a deadline, the moment you say, this is where I'm going. You begin the process of building a structure around your life that leads somewhere meaningful. A blueprint gives you sequence. It tells you what comes first, what matters most, and what can wait. It doesn't just show you the big picture. It breaks it down into manageable pieces. When a builder looks at a blueprint, he doesn't start by putting the roof in the air. He lays the foundation first. Then he builds upward level by level. That's how progress works. When you have a goal, you stop trying to do everything all at once. You focus. You prioritize. You build layer by layer. And that kind of structure protects you from overwhelm. It protects you from burnout. Because now, instead of reacting to everything, you're acting based on a plan. Life is full of noise, distractions, demands, deadlines, temptations. And if you don't have a blueprint, that noise controls you. It tells you what to do. It pulls you in every direction. But when your day is based on your goals, your blueprint tells you what matters. You begin each morning not with confusion, but with clarity. You know what to work on. You know what to say yes to and what to turn down. That kind of clarity saves hours, saves energy, and creates results. You stop measuring your success by how tired you feel and start measuring it by how aligned your actions are with your objectives. A blueprint also gives you milestones. It helps you track progress in real time. You can look back and say, I finished this step and I'm halfway there. That tracking builds confidence. It gives you momentum. It reminds you that you're not standing still. You're building something. You're not waiting for a miracle. You're participating in your own transformation. And that sense of control over your progress is one of the most empowering things a person can experience. You realize that the distance between where you are and where you want to be is not measured in luck. It's measured in daily effort, When you set a goal, you give your mind and body a destination. And with that destination in place, your time begins to organize itself around it. You start reading the right books, talking to the right people, practicing the right skills, saving money for the right investments. You make decisions based on the future instead of the moment. You stop asking, what feels good right now? And start asking, what brings me closer to what I'm building? That single shift in question changes the direction of your life. You wouldn't walk onto a construction site without knowing what you're supposed to build. You wouldn't start pouring concrete without knowing where the walls are supposed to go. But many people treat their lives that way. They take action without a goal. They work hard without a plan. They spend time without a purpose. That's why so many people feel stuck. Not because they lack talent, but because they lack structure. Goals provide that structure. They give every hour a reason. They give every choice a consequence. They give every step a sense of progress even when things go wrong, and they will. The blueprint keeps you steady. Setbacks don't throw you off course because you know the plan. You know how to adjust. You know what part of the blueprint to revisit, what step to refine, what approach to change. Without that plan, mistakes feel final. But with a blueprint, mistakes are just part of the build. You don't panic, you revise. You don't quit, you reframe. That ability to keep moving comes not from strength alone, but from structure. The process of writing your goals, mapping the steps, and tracking the progress is not just a mental exercise. It's a commitment. It's the act of saying, I take this seriously enough to build it properly. And that act builds discipline. It builds consistency. It builds confidence. As your blueprint takes shape, so does your belief. You start to see your life as something you're constructing, not something you're just living. And that perspective changes everything. You become the architect of your time, the engineer of your habits, the designer of your destiny. And what began as an invisible idea in your mind now has a real structure taking form right before your eyes. Discipline without purpose is just punishment. It feels like restriction, like deprivation, like saying no for the sake of saying no. But when you have a goal, discipline becomes something different. It becomes focused energy. It becomes a tool, not a task. It becomes something you choose, not something you're forced into. When you're working towards something meaningful, waking up early isn't a sacrifice. It's a step. Saying no to distractions isn't painful. It's empowering. With a clear goal in front of you, every disciplined choice you make has context, and context transforms how you experience effort. People often admire the discipline of successful individuals without understanding what drives it. They think these people are wired differently, born with a special kind of willpower. But the truth is, their discipline comes from their desire. They want something badly enough that they're willing to trade comfort for progress. They've set a goal so clear, so compelling, that it becomes the reason they push through fatigue, the reason they delay gratification, the reason they stay focused while others drift. Discipline is hard, but it gets lighter when you're carrying it for a reason. Without a goal, all you see is the weight. With a goal, you see the reward. Discipline gains meaning when you tie it to a vision of your future. Imagine someone who wants to get in shape. If they're doing it just because someone told them they should, every workout feels like a chore. Every healthy meal feels like punishment. But if their goal is to run a marathon, or to be healthy enough to play with their kids, or to look in the mirror and feel proud, that goal changes everything. Now, every drop of sweat has a purpose. Every repetition counts. Every decision matters. The discipline becomes meaningful because the goal gives it a reason to exist. Goals give you a why, and your why gives your discipline life. When your alarm rings at 5 a.m., you don't argue with yourself if you know what you're working toward. When temptations show up, you don't wrestle for hours if your goal is clear in your mind. You simply remind yourself of the bigger picture. That reminder turns "I have to" into "I choose to." And that choice is where real discipline is born, not from pressure, but from purpose. A person with a goal doesn't need to be forced. They're already fueled from within. They don't need someone watching over their shoulder. They're already watching themselves because they know what's at stake. Without goals, discipline feels like a grind. It feels like running on a treadmill, exertion without movement. But with goals, discipline feels like climbing a mountain. Yes, it's hard. Yes, it's steep. But every step brings you closer to the summit. You can measure your progress. You can feel the momentum. And that feeling makes the discipline sustainable. It becomes something you take pride in, not something you resent. Every moment of resistance builds character. Every act of restraint builds strength. Every disciplined decision becomes a vote for the person you're becoming. Discipline also becomes easier to maintain when you start to see results. And results only come from consistency, which is driven by your goals. When you've stayed committed long enough to see small wins, those wins validate your effort. They tell your brain, this is working. Keep going. That feedback loop fuels your motivation, but the initial spark came from the goal. Without that goal, you wouldn't have stayed in the game long enough to see the reward. It all starts with deciding what you want, because once you do, your discipline finally has something to serve. Another truth is that goals give you permission to say no, not because you're avoiding fun or pleasure, but because you've chosen something higher. When you set a goal, you give yourself a standard. That standard becomes the lens through which you view your choices. Is this food going to fuel me or slow me down? Is this activity going to push me forward or pull me off course? Is this purchase aligned with the life I'm building or a detour I'll regret? The goal answers those questions. And when the goal is strong enough, you don't feel deprived, you feel focused. You don't feel restricted, you feel directed. People often talk about the pain of discipline, but they forget the pain of regret is always heavier. The weight of saying no to something today is temporary. The weight of wondering, what if 10 years from now lasts far longer? When you live without goals, discipline feels like something you're always trying to force. But when you live with goals, discipline becomes something you embrace because you understand the cost of not having it. You realize that every undisciplined moment has a price, and that price is paid not in comfort, but in lost potential. The beauty of discipline guided by goals is that it doesn't require perfection. You'll still fall, still stumble, still miss a step. But when the goal is clear, you get back up faster. You realign, you recalibrate. You don't give up because you know where you're going and you know why it matters. That knowing gives you the strength to keep showing up. Discipline isn't about never breaking. It's about always coming back. And coming back becomes easier when you've got something real to come back to. Your habits, your routines, your sacrifices all start to feel worth it when they're connected to a destination. That destination is what makes every boring task, every tough choice, every delayed pleasure feel like an investment instead of a cost. Discipline fueled by a goal isn't a burden, it's a privilege. It means you're moving towards something. It means you're not lost. It means you've chosen to live with intention. And when you live with intention, discipline is no longer a cage. It becomes the bridge between where you are and where you've decided to be. Every dream, every vision, every imagined success begins in the unseen. It starts in the quiet corners of your mind, in the thoughts you think when no one is watching, in the images you carry when the world is silent. These invisible ideas are powerful, but they remain locked in the imagination until you do one thing: decide. The moment you decide, truly decide, to set a goal and pursue it, you begin the process of turning the invisible into the visible. That one decision is the spark that transforms possibilities into plans, intentions into actions, and someday into now. There are millions of ideas floating in the minds of people around the world, brilliant concepts, powerful stories, revolutionary inventions. But most of them will never see the light of day. Not because they weren't valuable, not because they lacked potential, but because someone never decided to act. The bridge between the unseen and the seen is decision, and goal setting is the form that decision takes. When you set a goal, you're saying, I no longer want to just think about this. I want to build it. I want to experience it. I want to live it. That's the shift. That's the moment your future begins to take shape. You don't need to know how everything will work out. You don't need to have all the answers. You just need to make the decision that this matters to you, that this is worth the effort, that this vision will not be left behind in your mind. That kind of decision pulls your future into the present. It gives form to your thoughts. It starts reshaping your behavior. You begin to walk differently, speak differently, think differently, not because the future has arrived, but because you've chosen to pursue it. That choice begins to realign your priorities, your habits, your circle, your routines. Most people are waiting for the perfect moment to begin, waiting for the stars to align, for someone to give them permission, for the fear to go away. But that moment never comes. The stars don't align until you move. Permission isn't granted, it's taken. Fear doesn't disappear, you move despite it. The moment of decision is never comfortable, but it is always powerful. It's the moment you stop being a spectator of your dreams and start becoming a participant in your own destiny. You're no longer watching life happen. You're shaping it. That's the power of goal setting. It's not about what you write on paper. It's about what that commitment does to your mindset. The future is not built in one leap. It's constructed brick by brick, step by step, day by day. But none of those steps begin until you decide to start. A person can live for years with potential, talent, intelligence, creativity, and still remain stuck. Not because they aren't capable, but because they haven't made the internal shift from thinking to deciding. The decision is what unlocks action. It's what converts your inner vision into external behavior. And the consistency of that behavior is what gradually carves out your future. Decision is the seed. Goal setting is the planting. Action is the watering. And time is the harvest. There's something powerful that happens when you take a dream and define it. When you give it a name, a number, a date, and a reason. Suddenly, it's no longer vague. It becomes real. You look at it and say, this is mine. This is what I want. This is where I'm going. That clarity transforms you. It awakens something within you, a new kind of hunger, a deeper level of commitment, the kind of focus that begins to shape your days with intention. You start seeing opportunities you never noticed before. You start connecting with people who share your energy. You start building momentum in places that once felt stuck, not because your circumstances changed, but because you did, because your decision shifted your direction. When you decide, the world around you begins to respond. It doesn't happen all at once. It doesn't always happen the way you imagined. But energy meets commitment. Movement meets determination. Resources begin to find you because your clarity begins to speak for you. People start to see what you're serious about. You walk into rooms with more purpose. You show up to tasks with more drive. You bounce back from setbacks with more resilience. All of that begins with the decision to set a goal. That one step tells your mind, your body, your environment, and your future, I'm no longer just wishing. I'm working. You don't need a perfect plan to get started. You just need a direction. You just need to put your feet on the ground and begin. The decision to begin is where most people stall. But that's the doorway to everything you want. Every result you admire, every life you're inspired by, every achievement you dream of started with that first brave moment. The moment someone stopped thinking about it and started doing something about it. That decision becomes the cornerstone of everything that follows. It becomes your compass when you get lost, your fuel when you get tired, your anchor when you feel uncertain. It reminds you that you've already chosen. And once you've chosen, you can return to that choice again and again, even when it gets hard, even when progress is slow, even when doubt creeps and every vision of your future is waiting on the other side of a decision. Not a vague wish, not a hopeful thought, but a real, firm, personal commitment to pursue it with intention. That commitment is expressed through the goals you set. You don't just drift into a better life. You decide your way into one. You take ownership of what you want. You make your desires visible, tangible, actionable. And by doing so, you begin to create a life that doesn't just exist in your head, but one you can live, touch, and experience in the real world. The invisible dreams that live in your heart are not meant to stay hidden. They are meant to be seen, built, and lived. But that transformation only begins when you decide to set a goal. Clarity gives you direction. Focus gives your mind a reason to act. Structure gives your progress a plan. Discipline gives your efforts a purpose. And decision gives your future a path to follow. The journey from the unseen to the seen is not a mystery. It's a process. And that process begins the moment you stop waiting and start choosing. You don't need permission to begin. You don't need guarantees. You need a vision, a decision, and the courage to move forward. Because the future doesn't just happen. It's created by those bold enough to set a goal and relentless enough to follow it through.